welcome everybody to the Prayer Spaces in Schools sessions. My name's Phil Togwell. I'm part of the Prayer Spaces in Schools team. Prayer Spaces in Schools, as you may know, is part of the 24/7 prayer movement. It was kind of born unexpectedly back in 2007, and Prayer Spaces have kind of spread all over the place since then. To date, there have been Prayer Spaces in Schools in about 30 nations. The purpose of these prayer space sessions, we've been running them for about a year now on Zoom, online, has been to sort of gather the best practice that we can. Some of them have been themed around particular areas like outdoor prayer spaces or Advent prayer spaces or prayer spaces that are themed particularly around mental health, that kind of thing. We've tried to theme these prayer space sessions to, really sorry about my dog's barking outside, to equip people to run the best possible prayer spaces that they can. So you're very welcome. We're really, really glad that you have come to join us tonight. If you haven't already done so, please change your name or change your tag to your actual name. And that'll be really useful to be able to see you a little bit later on. Over the last couple of years, it's obviously been really difficult to run prayer spaces in schools as normal. I mean, just to give you an idea, a snapshot of that, in 2019, it's 2 years ago, just over 2 years ago, we tracked and supported over 750 prayer spaces in schools. In 2021, we tracked and supported 50. That's been the impact of COVID, and it's made it very difficult for volunteers from local churches and local schools organisations to serve schools in the way that we've been used to for a long time. On the positive side, I think lots of local churches and local Christian organisations have innovated, they've adapted, they've changed their projects and found other ways to serve. And we'll talk really briefly tonight about other ways that prayer spaces have been developed so that they can be hosted at least in some way, perhaps not as ideal and as kind of big and bold as turning a whole classroom into a prayer space for a week, but we found some other ways to do it. Having said all of that, the signs are there, certainly the hope is there that things are going to open up a little bit more for us. We've found more people have been registering prayer spaces or planning them. Some of the local Christian organisations, schools or organisations have been mapping them out already. And the very fact that you're all here to hopefully learn a little bit about how to get started with prayer spaces is, I think, a sign of good things to come. So we're very hopeful. The plan for tonight is that Liz and Jane and I are going to sort of roll through some of the real basics in getting started with prayer spaces in schools. We're going to do that. We're going to deliver some content for about 30 minutes at the most, 35 minutes perhaps. And then what we're planning to do is to split into some breakout rooms. Laura's going to organise that. Rooms of about 3 or 4 people. I'm really aware that some people love breakout rooms, some people don't. I'm not a huge fan, but our experience over the past year has been that these breakout rooms have been really, really useful for us to learn a little bit from one another. And it's been surprising how often people have found themselves in a room with someone who they live not too far away from, or they're in a similar circumstance. And it's been really encouraging for them. So the breakout rooms will be quite short, probably 7 or 8 minutes at the moment. And we've got a couple of questions for you to explore around prayer spaces. And then we'll come back for a final few minutes to reflect and look at what are the next steps to take. And as I said, for those of you who arrived earlier, what we've decided, we will finish at 8:30 for those who need to go. That's what we've planned to do. But the Prayer Space in Schools team, we're going to stick around online for another 15 minutes if anyone wants to ask some specific questions. And we might sort of push you into some conversations. If you're from around the Bristol area, we'll kind of push you off to Liz and Jane. And if you've got specific questions about other things, we'll try and match you up with someone who can help. So that's the plan. Please use the chat. Please ask questions. Send your experience as well, links to things that you know might be of use to other people. And yeah, that's the plan for tonight. I hope that's okay. I hope you've come to the thing you thought you were coming to. And so we're going to kick off. Laura, can you pop the slideshow on? And I'm going to do this first few minutes together. Getting started with prayer spaces in schools. We've got the Instagram and Facebook links on there. If you haven't already found us on social media, please do have a look there. There's often photos of prayer spaces or quotes from children and young people and staff of their experience of prayer spaces. So do follow us there. Laura, can you move me along? Thank you. Just to sort of set the scene, I don't know how many of you have been involved in creating a mission statement, spending hours and hours writing one sentence to try and describe what you do. This is what we came up with quite a few years ago now, and I'm going to read it. Prayer spaces enable children and young people of all faiths and none, and that's really important to us, to explore spirituality, faith, and life's big questions in a safe and a creative and an interactive way. And I hope you'll see that as we show you some photos and talk a little bit about how prayer activities and prayer spaces work. As an organisation, we feel like our task is to equip local churches, local Christians. Prayer spaces in schools doesn't run any prayer spaces. What prayer spaces in schools does is it equips local Christians to serve their school communities. You know this as well as I do, don't you? If we want to really see our local communities transformed, our local communities becoming happier, more joyful, more generous, more kind, more forgiving, more hopeful places, it comes about through the church sowing seeds of the kingdom, doing good, serving, being a blessing. And we really feel our experience over these last 10, 12, 13 years has been that prayer spaces sow great seeds into the lives of school communities, and it begins to transform communities. So we have high hopes, along with the Apostle Paul, who says, you know, the glory of God is revealed through his church. So that's our task, to join in a little bit with that. Laura, next slide. So prayer spaces, they kind of serve schools in all sorts of different ways, which the next slide should show, if it appears. Back on, forward on, there we go. There are lots of different ways that prayer spaces can meet the needs of schools. And I've just put a few up there. The one I want to point out to you in particular is right across the middle: spiritual, moral, social and cultural learning. You may already be really familiar with this, but all schools, certainly in England and Wales, are expected to deliver spiritual, moral, social and cultural learning. That's not specific to religious education. It's the whole school. All schools, whether they are church schools or community schools, are expected to deliver a spiritual, moral, social and cultural learning environment. I'd really encourage you to seek out the documents on the government website about this stuff, because if you're part of a local church, you'll read this and you'll think, that's the kind of stuff that we can do. We offer that. So when we are offering to a local school, can we serve you by hosting a prayer space in some form? We're helping schools to deliver what they are expected to do. So prayer spaces genuinely are a real blessing to school communities as a whole. And obviously at an individual level, school prayer spaces serve pastoral needs, and they touch on self-esteem issues, and they help with relationships, and they serve and support children's spiritual life too. So there's lots of different ways that prayer spaces are of value. My last slide in this little section before I hand over is a really, really important one. It's the next one, Laura. So one of the things that's really helped us to understand the value, or to provide a little bit of foundation for prayer spaces in schools, came through a piece of research that David Hay and Rebecca and I did in 2007. And then we really built on in 2017 when we did our own nationwide research project into the impact of prayer spaces in schools. We partnered with York St John University. Professor Julian Stern did a big project for us, speaking with hundreds of children and young people about the impact of prayer spaces in schools. And you can find all of the details of that on our website. But this this image that we've got, this slide that we've got, is a summary of the impact, what Professor Julian Stone found was happening in prayer spaces. First, we found that children and young people were gaining something, were growing in their relationship with themselves. They were exploring some of their own emotions. There were benefits to their mental health. One of the head teachers, one of the schools, said this has had a bigger impact on the well-being of my pupils than anything else that we've done. And so prayer spaces, if I was to use one word to describe prayer spaces, I would use the word reconciliation. Prayer spaces at one level help children and young people to become reconciled to themselves. They're related to well-being, to how I view myself. They're also related to reconciliation with others. So some of the prayer activities, as you'll see in a few minutes, are to do with forgiveness, they're to do with saying sorry, they're to do with restoring relationships. Prayer spaces are often the opportunity for children and young people to reflect on what is broken in my relationships and how can they be restored. And we get lovely stories every now and again of children or young people who have actually reconciled with others as a result of some activity that they've done in a prayer space. And this is critical to the way that prayer spaces work. The third area, and Jane Gillis would be the one to talk to about this stuff, prayer spaces are to do with being reconciled to the world, to the environment, to the globe that we're part of. We see that right at the beginning of the Bible, don't we, where God creates human beings and says, here, I'm giving you all of this, be good stewards. And those of you who work with children and young people regularly, particularly children, you'll know how tuned in children are to this stuff, to issues of environmental care and tackling issues of injustice. And prayer spaces often have a feature around this. It's an important part of what children and young people experience when they reflect and pray in a prayer space. And the final area, probably the obvious one, I guess, is that prayer spaces are places of reconciliation in terms of our spiritual life too. So children and young people, like all of the rest of us as older children and young people, if you have questions about what do we believe and why do we believe and what is there beyond what we can see and feel and touch, and can we trust the things that people have told us, and how do we find out for ourselves? And prayer spaces have, over these last 12, 13 years, been brilliant places for children and young people to taste and see, to try, to explore. So I hope this slide is useful to you. Take a screenshot of it if you want. I think there's details of this on our website as well, so you can find it there. But this is important. We're going to come back to it a little bit later on. This, for us, provides a sort of theological framework. The thing that David Hay and Rebecca Knight argued was that spirituality is all of these things. It's not just the bottom right-hand corner bit. It's not just the God bit, but our spiritual life is all four of these areas. And I think we could easily argue that from the Bible. And so this helps us in how we construct the activities that we put in a prayer space. So hold that thought in your mind. I'm going to hand over now to Jane, who's going to tell us a little bit about the different places that prayer spaces have worked in. Over to you, Jane.
Great, fantastic. Hopefully we can all still see the slides. We're going to go back on the slides in a way. And yeah, we've got Billy the dog here as well, just in case you're interested. This is a schnauzer, miniature schnauzer with us. So yeah, I'm going to just run through where you can run prayer spaces. So we'll go back onto the slides, and you can pretty much do them anywhere, okay, in terms of on a school site. And I think pretty much all these are going to come up. I've probably done them in all these contexts. And I can remember hearing Phil about 15 years ago speak at some conference and thinking, prayer spaces in school, does that really work? And years and years on, I've sort of realized that, yeah, he was right all those years ago. So here we go. So this is a picture of them being done in a secondary school. They work really well in a secondary school. I think this is done in a classroom, this one. When you run them with older children, young people, you can pretty much put the cards out, the instruction cards, and the young people can sort of do it themselves, as long as you're setting a really good atmosphere in that zone. And so these, look here, I'm trying to look, I don't think I can see any adults there. There'll probably be 1 or 2 adults in the room, but they're not right there by the prayer activities. They're given the space there. So that's the secondary school sort of setting, classroom, or you might have a hall or whatever. We'll look at the next picture, which shows, here we go, next slide is, oh, there we go, a primary school. What you'll notice here is we've got an adult here. So the children are obviously a lot younger. And whenever I run them with younger groups, then you up the number of adults you've got helping. That's generally my sort of plan. So when I look at a timetable of a prayer space, I sort of think, right, okay, I've got year 1s coming, or I've got reception coming. Can I get a few more volunteers to turn up at the school for that session? Because that is going to be where these children can't necessarily read the instructions, or they might just find it a little bit hard to access. So they need an adult to sort of guide them through that. So yeah, younger children, you're going to need some more people to help staff those activities. So yeah, they work in secondary schools, they work in primary schools. And let's have a look at the next slide. What have we got here? The next slide, here we go, is, yeah, showing that actually sometimes all you've got is a small space. So I don't know quite what this space is. It might be a small sort of little breakout room that they've said, actually, we can clear that and give that to you as a church team or a local volunteer team to come in and run a prayer space. So not very big, but it looks like there I can see a few different activities that have been set up. So you can use the walls, you can use tables, you can use the floor. It looks like there's a little trampoline there on the left-hand side as well. So yeah, you can use small spaces. We've even heard of people using cupboards. I was put in a cupboard once to run one, and yeah, cleared it all out and went, okay, well, we can put about 4 activities in here, and I can have a smaller group that comes in. So yeah, they can be run in very small spaces too. All right, let's have a look at the next one. The next space is outdoors. I first did an outdoor prayer space, literally because the school, I was trying to get them to do a prayer space for years and years, and they were saying, we don't have any room. We don't have any room. It went on and on and on. And in the end, I said, yeah, you do. You've got the room outside. So I stuck a bell tent up. This isn't that story. This is another story here. But yeah, just stuck a bell tent up and just did all my normal sort of activities and did it in a bell tent. I've sort of changed with how I do outdoor stuff now. This one was one that we did back in October, so only a few months ago. And I've just become more and more passionate about doing them outdoors. We've got a few spaces there just in case it hammers down with rain or whatever. This was a glorious day. But yeah, I'm so passionate about doing them outdoors. I've changed it from being not necessarily the things that you would normally do inside and just taking them outside, but trying to tune in to the amazing prayer space that's already there. The grass, the little things that they see on the bark of trees. I think that day we had raindrops that were all on the blades of grass. And for me, just seeing children go wow, wow, wow at the world around them, whether it's through a magnifying glass or through binoculars or lying on those mats and looking at the sky and just calming down and connecting with the world around them and saying, wow, for me, that is a sort of deep sense of worship that's going on, whether they know that or not, is quite an incredible thing to see children engaging with that. So yeah, outdoors is what I am really passionate about. The team, you can see a couple of adults there leading that outside. That team are from my local village. They don't know anything else, so they always say to me, why do people run them indoors? So they're so convinced by the outdoors because that's all they've done. That's, yeah, they're totally into that. So yeah, let's have a look at the next one. So outdoors, we've got all sorts. Yeah, let's go back. Here we go. This is something that started, I know a few different people did this during COVID, did them, and just to say as well, outdoor stuff, we didn't really have as many obstacles when it was COVID times of getting back and saying, actually, could we do it outdoors? They were much more open to that. This is another COVID friendly option. This is a team who've set it up and put it in bags. So they've probably done a number of activities there in bags, probably one per child. And I just thought, let's just do it. Let's do it for this particular class. A lovely way of just saying, yeah, we're doing it. There's a PDF that's being developed. I think that's going to come out soon, called Prayer Space in a Bag. And yeah, also people have run them online, hosted them online during COVID. So yeah, there are ways and means. And then we've got our last slide, I think. Here we go. And this is a group that, I mean, generally it's in the name, isn't it? Prayer Spaces in school. So generally we're big on saying, let's do them in school. Let's do them on the school site. This place here is a church building. So a church team have said to the local school, probably a school that are close, do you want to come and do it in the church building? I did that once when I worked at a church that were very close, and they were just keen on having a space where they could come that was a big awe and wonder space. So yeah, another option there. So yeah, basically it's, you know, use your imagination with what you're given and so on, but they are all sorts of possibilities there. Good. I think I'm done there, Phil.
Do you want me to jump straight in, Phil?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, hi everybody, I'm Liz. Great to have you here today. So we've had a little think about why you might run a prayer space, and we've had a think about where you might run a prayer space, and now we're going to have a little think about what might your prayer space look like. You know, what prayer activities might you use? What might children and young people pray about in the prayer space? And if you visit the prayerspacesandschools.com website, you'll find over 200 prayer activities for you to just download for free. And we're going to have a look at some of those now, which enable children and young people to explore those 4 key areas of relational spirituality that Phil referred to a bit earlier, the ones that were drawn out in the research project that we did in 2017. So first of all, how do prayer spaces help children and young people explore their relationship with themselves, so me and myself? And our research showed over and over again that and our experience really shows that children and young people just love having time to self-reflect. So if we look at the next slide, Laura, thank you. So this is an activity called Be Still. It kind of does what it says on the tin. It offers children and young people a chance to be still and not to do. And this is a very unfamiliar concept for them in the middle of their school day, that nobody's asking them to do anything. They're just being asked to be and to be still. And so there'll be like a visual focal point, usually, maybe a lava lamp like in this photo, maybe a bubble tube, maybe a fake set of candles or a beautiful photo. Something like that, or maybe they'll be outside, like Jane said, you know, and they'll have plenty of visual stimulus to occupy them as they just sit and be. And so there's a visual stimulus, and sometimes children, you can give them a little timer to help them to know how long that they're sitting still for, so that to encourage them not to move until they've used up the timer, if you like. And they basically are invited to do nothing, to be still. And children just again, the research showed that children love the opportunity to just engage in those internal conversations with themselves, you know, like you and I do. Hopefully we do. It's a sign, I suppose, of good mental, emotional health. We have conversations with ourselves about things when we get the time and space to do that. And this is really what that's about. It enables children to just be comfortably alone with themselves. You know, there's a structure around them. They're being asked to do this. They know they're in a safe space. They can just be comfortably alone with themselves. And of course, that kind of space, as we all know, most of us, helps them to overcome stress, to sift their thoughts, just to stop moving for a little while and to be. So this is an example of a prayer activity that helps the children and young people explore their relationship with themselves. The next slide, thanks, Laura. And this is another example. So this is called Mirrors. usually, or be yourself. And as you can see, children and young people are invited to look at themselves in a mirror, and then around that mirror there would be some prompts, some encouraging words, often based on Bible verses, something like "you are unique," "you are precious," "you are known," "you are seen," those kinds of things. "You have gifts to offer," and they're invited to do that, and to look at those words and to look at themselves. And so this is another opportunity for them to explore their relationship with themselves, to think about their identity and their self-worth. And a prayer activity like this, for me, when I look at those young people looking at themselves in the mirror, and I've experienced lots of time standing in this kind of position where the photographer is standing, watching this unfold and work out, and been acutely aware that my reaction into reaction, presence in the space is really important. It's so important that your team that you recruit to host prayer spaces with you understand the nuance and understand the depth of what can be occurring, and also the vulnerability of the students. And so just to sort of flag up really how important it is to recruit the right kinds of people to help you host your prayer space. And so just a really quick, as we're looking at this photograph, a quick run through of what that might be. The sort of who you're looking for would be those people who can be listeners, those people who perhaps have a pastoral bent to their personality, people who aren't going to come with a particular agenda into the prayer space, and people who can be like a reassuring presence really. And they need to be able to work safely and appropriately with young people, because this isn't the only prayer activity that in a sense invites children and young people into quite a vulnerable situation. So it's really important that your team is able to work well in that sort of space. You might find your team in your church or in other local churches around. We love to see churches working together to put teams together. You might know some Christian parents within the school. I even know someone who used parents of other faiths to help host the prayer space as well. The aim is that it's majority Christian hosted, because in their essence we're hosting, I suppose, in the name of the church, the local church. You might find Christian governors who are up for being on your team. And we always suggest that you first of all pray about who would be a good person to ask to be on your team, and then ask them personally. We don't recommend that you put out a broad advert who would like to come and be on the prayer space team, but that you pray and ask people personally. Jane's already touched on numbers. The older the children, the less helpers you need. Something like maybe one adult per activity if it's key stage 1, maybe 4 or 5 people if it's key stage 2, and you've got about 7 or 8 activities. And maybe, a key stage 3 prayer space, I've run those with 3 volunteers. So it just depends on the age. Everybody needs to be DBS checked and understand the school safeguarding policy. You'll want to run a little training session for your team where you can just run through roles, what they are expected to do, what they're not, run through, discuss any worries they have, questions, explain what the prayer space is, show them photos, talk about practicalities. And then just checking in with your team as the prayer space is being hosted is also important. So that's just a little side into the kinds of people that you're inviting to host your prayer space with you. Could you slip on to the next one, Laura? Thank you. Here are some prayers that children and young people have posted as they've explored their relationship with themselves. Again, it just shows that children and young people do open themselves up in prayer spaces. It can be quite a vulnerable space, but hopefully a really positive space. And the next prayer kind of bears that out. It made me feel good about myself. And, over and over again, we hear children and young people emerge from prayer spaces feeling lighter and feeling better about themselves. So that's a really good thing. Okay, the next slide is a little quote. I'll give you a moment to read that. So prayer spaces are really well positively received. I can't think of an exception that I've ever heard of where a prayer space hasn't been well received by the school staff. And, you know, we all know what the current climate is like for children and young people, and how much they have suffered socially and mentally in terms of their health over this pandemic. And so well-being is just such a hot topic and so important. And prayer spaces provide you an opportunity to speak into that, speak into the well-being and promote the well-being of students. So they're a great way to do that. And schools need all the help they can get in terms of promoting the mental and emotional well-being of their students. Okay, next slide, please. We're going to whiz through these ones. So that second area of relational spirituality was exploring my relationship with others. And this is what young people do in their prayer spaces. Next slide. So example of some prayer activities are sorry strings. Oop, I think we've jumped one, that's it. Sorry strings, they might think about something they've done or said that they regret, write it on a card and peg it to a string. The next slide. Forgiveness stones, where they hold a stone, they listen to an MP3 recording, and it gives them the opportunity to place the stone into a bowl as a way of forgiving somebody who's hurt them. And then next slide. So you can see that, going back to that forgiveness prayer, that, you know, prayer spaces actually have an impact on children's relationships. Then this next slide is the empty chair, which is an opportunity for children and people to express grief over someone that's no longer in their lives, and they get to write a message to that person or a prayer for that person on the chair. And then the next one, you can see that yeah, children express their bottled up, if you just go back to that once, thanks Laura, express their bottled up emotions and process their emotions in the prayer space. And it's worth just mentioning here as well that prayer spaces are a great way to be used when something specific is going on in the school. For instance, you know, occasionally there is a bereavement within the school that affects everybody. And you know, using a prayer space to help the school community process that is a really effective thing to do. But you can use them for all sorts of other themes. You could use them to look at the school's values of respect, forgiveness, courage, etc. You could use them to help them celebrate festivals like Advent, Lent, Harvest, or Creation Care. You could use them at special times of year, like when their exams are coming up, to help relieve stress, or when there's transition and change from one year group to another. And if you go on our website, you'll see that there's loads of ways that you can filter the resources to select the ones for the theme that you want to cover. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Phil now, and he's going to talk to you about these other two areas of relational spirituality and what prayer activities you might use.
Fantastic. I've just spotted in the chat a couple of friends from the States. Please message us. Please send us an email, because I'd love to put you in touch with our coordinator in the States, who's just exploring how prayer spaces could work in the American school system, which will be fun. Third area of reconciliation, me and the world. And so there's a number of activities on the prayer space in the school site. As Liz has already mentioned, I think there's about 200 that are available for you to download for free for the princely sum of your email address. Having registered on the Prayer Spaces in Schools website, you can download everything on there if you want. There are lots of prayer activities. There's research report. There's the SMSC document. There's all sorts of stuff on there. So, and you can have it all for nothing. So please do that. And there are loads of examples of prayer activities that are to do with me and myself, me and others. And here we are with me and the world. Laura, can you flick me forward onto the next slide? Just here's a few examples of world-themed prayer activities. Pray for the world, simple idea here. Place a glass bead on somewhere in the world where you're aware that something's going on. You might have picked it up off the news, or you've got a family member perhaps you haven't seen for a long time. And so, you know, children and young people get that chance to express some of the stuff, and I'm sure you're aware of this, some of the stuff that they feel inside, that they're kind of carrying, they feel something about but don't know what to do with. I think that's often the case, particularly for children. You're not quite sure, how do I influence this? How do I connect with what's going on in the world? And this gives a simple outlet to express some of those hopes and fears and concerns. Next slide. Some of the activities are about specific issues of injustice. You may remember just not so long ago, and again we're seeing it this year, images on our TV screens of boats packed with people trying to get across the English Channel or across the Mediterranean, and sadly many of them not surviving. And we had those really traumatic, troubling images. And a school in Norwich in England decided, we want to create an activity that's themed around this. And so they got this big inflatable life raft, put it up in one of the school halls, and the children and young people were invited to climb into the boat to imagine what would it be like if they were in the boat, in this kind of boat. And then if they wanted to, they could write a thought, a hope, a wish, or a prayer for those that were so scared that they were having to run for their lives onto little luggage tags and tie it to the boat. And hundreds of young people did that. In fact, this prayer on this particular occasion, the local member of parliament came to visit the prayer space to have a look at what had done. And he was so moved by what he read on some of these luggage tags that he asked if he could gather them up, if the school give him permission to take them and to write a little petition back to the House of Commons. So sometimes these prayers, these expressions of hope, of longing, of there's injustice, I want to do something about it, can have a bigger impact. Let's look at the next slide. I think I've got one more example. Cardboard Home, this is called. So often a school has a particular charity that it's connected to, or they're trying to serve the community in some way. And I think this school was trying to sort of connect with Crisis on that particular year. And so they had these big cardboard boxes, and children were invited to crawl inside and write their hope, their wish, their prayer for those who had no home. Perhaps a cardboard box was their home, onto the cardboard boxes themselves. So, you know, and I want you to hear the language here. For some of the children and young people, they don't have a faith, they don't have a kind of spirituality perhaps that they identify. Prayer activities, these reflection activities, then give them permission to express their hopes, their wishes. It's not required, there's not a demand that that children and young people pray, because that might not be their native language, that might be not what they're familiar with. And so they're invited, use these activities in a way that is meaningful for you. Don't feel excluded from them. Use them in a way that is meaningful for you. And for some, that is a hope or a wish, a longing. For many, it is praying or trying prayer for the first time. And hopefully these are some good examples. I think we're on to the last little section, the me and God. There we go. So next slide. My personal favourite prayer activity, and I would encourage every prayer space to include this activity, is called Big Questions. It's a really simple idea. Get some torn up cardboard or some post-it notes or whatever it might be, something that children and young people can do a little imaginary exercise, and it just goes like this. Imagine God is sitting at the table here or standing with you right now. What would be the one question, whether you believe in God or not, what would be the one question you'd like to ask God? We've found it fascinating over the years how easy children and young people take to this. Why? Because their lives are full of questions. And as adults, we've probably learned to hold our questions in, because asking questions, particularly for those of us who are Christians, we're part of church. Often church isn't a safe place to ask questions, and yet Jesus seems to invite them. In fact, he seems to constantly ask people questions, and even when he is asked questions, he seems to bounce them back with further questions. You know, Jesus seems to encourage and invite asking questions. Who do you say I am? What do you think? He asks often. And so we love big questions. I've got a few examples of students' big questions here. Lots of the questions that they ask are kind of head questions. They're theology, they're questions about, you know, how can God listen to everyone's prayers all at once? That is a great question. Next slide. I do like this one. Plenty of questions. Well, some questions are fun. Why did you make wasps and flies? That is a very, very good question. I love the fact that there's plenty of humour in prayer spaces, and I think it's good that we give permission and encourage a little bit of that. Next couple of slides, or next slide. Some of them are kind of quite angsty. You allow wars. Why? This is kind of, it's very psalm-like, this question, isn't it? And I love that whoever the child was that wrote this has given God a couple of emoji faces on there, just in case God needs to understand the difference between war and not war. You know, there's a bit of anger, there's a bit of frustration in there, and that's okay, isn't it? You know, we often as adults, we learn to sort of temper down our prayers, but if we flop our Bibles open into the middle and have a look at Psalms, a lot of David's Psalms, his prayers, his songs there were angry, they were frustrated, they were, why God? You know, and I think it's important that we give that kind of permission. Last question, last big question here. Most of the big questions that we see, I'm sure those of you who've been running prayer spaces would agree with me, most of the big questions that we see are heart questions. They are questions of suffering, and not just the suffering out there, but the suffering in here. And it's so important that we encourage, that we give permission for children and young people to ask those questions of God and not be in a rush to answer them. And I think this is where it comes back to Liz's point about choosing your team is really important. You've seen lots of different resources on here. Just to say, your prayer spaces don't need to be expensive. As you can see, they can be torn up cardboard and pegs and strings and things like that. So my advice is to keep things as simple as you can. My daughters used to say they knew whenever I was running a prayer space because all the bean bags and the lamps disappeared out of their bedrooms. I did ask them, but you know, perhaps they'd forgotten. So you know, you don't need to spend a lot of money. You can get your resources relatively easy most of the time. So I think that's me done. Oh no, how to host a prayer space session. I need to say really quickly. I know I've gone over time. Sorry. Usually there'll be a team of 4 or 5 adults. That was what we'd recommend, 4 or 5 adults to host the prayer space. And what often happens is classes are timetabled to come to the room or the outdoor space, or maybe half a class to a smaller area. And then as a host team, we'd probably spend 10 minutes maybe at the start, introducing, explaining what was going on, inviting some questions. If we're in a primary school, we might want to separate the class into some smaller groups and send them to different parts of the prayer space. And then they would have plenty of time to go and explore the activities. And then what we usually encourage teams to do is invite the class back together at the end for just a few minutes of reflection, and how did you feel, and what did you like, and what was different to what you expected, and you know, has this made you think any differently about prayer, that kind of stuff. There's lots more information about how to host a prayer space session on our website, but for now I'm going to hand back to Jane, who's going to tell us what we're doing in small groups.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, hopefully your mind is buzzing, and even if you've run lots and lots of prayer spaces, you're thinking, oh my goodness, let's get back connected with that in this academic year that we're in. So yeah, we're going to split into groups, and as Phil said at the beginning, some of you will be going yes, some of you will be thinking oh no, but hopefully we'll all get something from it. And it's so good to have so much experience in this sort of, I suppose we're in a bit of a Zoom room. And so, yeah, we've got 2 things we want you to do when you go into your group. So if we show the slide, Laura, and we're trying to get it so that everyone says something, would be great. So that if everyone in your group, if you've got 2 or 3, share. So we're keeping it quite snappy. So the things we'd love you to share is, number 1, one top tip from your own experience of prayer spaces. All right, one top tip. And if you haven't ran one, then listen to the others in your group. So one top tip from your own experience. And then secondly, and hopefully all of us will be able to share something of this, what are your hopes for hosting prayer spaces this academic year? Okay, so hopefully before the summer, what is your hope? Yeah, so 2 questions. We're going to split. It'll go invite you, and then you'll have to go, go, go. And yeah, make sure you listen to everyone and give space for everyone's voice. That'd be fantastic. And we'll probably have, I think it's going to be about 5 minutes. All right, so about 5 minutes or so.
What I'm going to do just in these last few minutes is just to run through 5 things that you could do now as you work towards running your first or your next prayer space. I really hope that's the intention, to crack on and try and run prayer spaces. So first thing is to talk to the school. I know it sounds really obvious. Often people ask, how do you do that? Our advice is always find the relational connection that you already have. Now, for some of you, that's really obvious. You know the head teacher, or you're a parent and from a child that's in the school, or perhaps one of the teachers in your church, or perhaps you know one of the parent governors, perhaps you know one of the cleaning staff. Chances are there's a relational connection somewhere, and if there is, that's the bridge in which to cross. Have a coffee with that person, have a phone call or a Zoom call, show them this Prayer Space in School's website, talk about what we talked about today and sound them out. Kind of, what do you think? Do you think this would be possible in our school? And if so, who do we need to talk to next? Take that sort of step-by-step approach if you can. If you don't already have those connections, the next thing I'd suggest is to pray for that relational connection and that bridge. The last option, which is probably the bravest of all, is to just phone up and see if you can arrange a meeting with one of the senior leadership team and just offer them, look, I've found this idea. It's been working in lots of other schools over the last 13 or more years. What do you think? Is this something that we could do as a church to serve you? But number one is talk to the school. The aim there is to build that relationship with the school. That is the probably the most important thing, is building that relationship with the school. Second thing is recruit your team. Liz talked about it a bit. I've mentioned it as well. We often say when we do training, do you know what the real magic of a prayer space is? It's not the prayer activities. It's not the post-it notes and the torn up cardboard and the bubble tubes and the gazebos and all the other stuff. It's the people. It's the team that you gathered. It's their hospitality. It's their listening skills. It's their kindness. It's their patience. That's the stuff that is really going to change the lives of the children and young people. So I'd really encourage you, don't ask for volunteers, handpick your dream team, especially if this is going to be your first prayer space. Have a think, maybe have a pray. Who would be the absolute best 4 or 5 people that I could have with me hosting this prayer space? Think about perhaps older people. And my experience, I always want to have a grandma or a granddad on my team, because they bring something. They often bring something to a prayer space. They bring that kind of, I don't know, patience, that hospitality, that listening, that life experience. And they bring a role that for lots of children and young people is missing in their lives too. So I'm always on the lookout for a couple of grandmas and granddads on my prayer spaces team. So number 1, talk with your school. Number 2, recruit your team. Number 3, Jane's little section, think carefully about how to host your prayer space. Is it going to work for you to take over a classroom for a week and run your prayer space? Is it going to work better to suggest let's do something outside? Is it going to work better actually to fill some bags with some prayer activities that could be done on a desktop? Is it going to be better to offer to do something online, visually? All of those things have worked to greater or lesser degree of impact. But have a think carefully. Don't write it off. Don't write off the idea just because you can't get use of a classroom for a whole week. Maybe start somewhere smaller and shorter and offer that to the school first, and then build up as things open up, as we obviously hope they will over the course of this year. So that's number 3. Number 4, use the website. The reason I say that is simply that there have been thousands of prayer spaces, probably 4,000 or 5,000 prayer spaces now over the course of this last decade. And that accumulated wisdom and ideas is hopefully somewhere there on the Prayer Spaces in Schools website. We gave it a thorough reboot last year, and so there's loads and loads of good stuff. And basically, if you can't find what you're looking for on that website, please email us, because chances are someone will have done what you are thinking of doing, and we may be able to put you in contact with someone else. And the final thing is, please tell us when you're running a prayer space, register it, or just ping us an email and let us know. It's great for us because it helps us get this kind of overall map of where prayer spaces are happening. But also it's really helpful for you because we can often put you in touch with other people locally who are wanting to run prayer spaces or have got experience already. We were talking as a team a little bit earlier, and we're really excited about the number of you that have joined this call. And so what we've decided is we want to offer you some one-on-one support in any way that we can possibly do that. We're going to stick around like now. We're going to close in a minute's time and be available here, but we're also probably going to do this time next week, just a bunch of us will be on team with no agenda other than whoever turns up on Zoom. We'll just want to offer some a chance to talk about how prayer spaces run. If you ping us an email and let us know where you are, where you're based, we'd love to put you in touch with local people, or if it is helpful for you, we'll arrange a one-on-one Zoom call with one of the team, because we really want to do everything we can to equip you and support you to run brilliant prayer spaces. It's in our best interest, because if you run great prayer spaces, chances are that you will be a catalyst for others in your local area too. So we really want to see that happening. So I hope that's useful, those 5 things. I want to end now because I know it's 2 minutes over time. But and so if you want to leave now, you are really, really welcome to do so. You will receive an email in a couple of days' time from Laura, from us and the team. It will have a video, a YouTube version of tonight's session, so you can share that with other people. It'll also include some links. I know there's lots of stuff been going on in the chat, and we'll try and include all of those links and answers to the questions that you've asked, because we want to equip you. But please, can you get back in touch with us? Let us know where you are, what your plans are, and we'll do everything we can to support you as personally as we possibly can, because we really do want to encourage you. I hope it's been useful for you tonight. Perhaps we can just go back to gallery view now and just all wave at each other. It's been really lovely to meet some of you, and we really look forward to going on a bit more of a prayer space journey with you tonight. But I'm going to call time out now and say, look, just go and do what you need to for the rest of the evening. And those of you that are still sticking around, in 1 minute's time, we'll start fielding some questions and start pointing them around. So thank you very much, everybody. Good night.